Hey everyone, Mason here. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the presence detection setup that I have in my current system right now. I've talked about it a little bit in previous videos, but just wanted to kind of dive in a little bit more. Currently, one of the biggest tools that I'm using is Life360. This is an application that my wife and I both have downloaded on our phones to track our current location, and then we can actually feed that data back into be used by Home Assistant and also Node-RED for different automations. You can see here, if I pull up in my tracker, it'll show when I'm home and also when I'm away from home. There's a few other locations built in, but ultimately for the automations in this video, I'm only going to be looking at whether we're home or away. To go along with these trackers, I've set up some input booleans that will be flagged as on or off depending on if I'm home or if my wife's home or if either of us is home. You can see these down here in Home Assistant. At a basic level, these just act as on-off switches and don't provide much other functionality to Home Assistant other than being used within other systems that you might build around them. So first of all, I'll just show the basic YAML that you use to set them up. So we have an input.boolean YAML, which I have referenced in my normal configuration.yaml. And they're really basic. You have an entity name along with a friendly name, which is what shows up in Home Assistant. Nothing else to them because they aren't driving the functionality on their own. Within Home Assistant, they're just an on-off switch, which you can toggle manually if you want to. But the better use of them is to use them within an automation where you can turn it on based on an action happening. We'll take a closer look at that over in Node-RED. This is my main flow that's controlling how these switches get toggled on and off. This top section here is for flagging us as home, either myself, my wife, or one of us. We use a few different nodes in these flows. The first node here is an event state node. The way that these work is that you define an entity within them, and it'll track the current state of it. For each of the ones in this flow, we're just tracking the device tracker entities from Life360. You can see this first one here is for me. And ultimately what these do is say whether or not the flow should continue based on this halt if state line within the node. And you can see this one says halt if state is not home, which in plain English really just means continue the flow if Mason is home, stop it if he's not. So you could see functionally the way that'll work is if I am home, it'll continue on to the next set of nodes where this top one here is a call service node. These nodes are a way to call a service within Home Assistant to perform some type of action. In this case, the actions are going to involve those input booleans that I just talked about. This input boolean is tracking whether I'm at home or away. So when this one is called, it is because I'm at home and it's going to turn this switch on. You could see a similar flow for my wife as well, which will work the same way. If she is not at home, it's going to halt the flow and not continue on. If she is at home, it's going to continue on and call the service to set her input boolean to say that she is home. You might have noticed the extra two branches leaving from these first nodes that are leading to this third call service node. This call service node is setting the input boolean for the global flag to say whether anyone's at home or not, which is why it's connected to both of us. If either of us is at home, this will get called and it'll set the home flag to on. Great, so this top section is really all about turning those switches on, but we also need to turn them off when we're away. So that's where this bottom section comes into play. So similar to the top, we have a starting point for both of our trackers, but in this case you could see we have the opposite halt if state. So this says halt if state is home, which just means stop the flow if Mason's at home, otherwise let it continue on. So if I'm away from home, we're going to go to this first call service node, and this is going to be the opposite of the Mason home call service, which is going to turn off the input boolean for myself. And then we have the similar thing on the bottom for my wife. If she is not home, call the service to turn off her input boolean as well. Now these extra branches here are used to help control that global flag that says whether anyone's at home or not. But we need some extra handling for the away case because we only want it to go to away or off when no one's at home anymore. So for example, if I'm away, we also then need to check whether Jess is at home or not in order to set the flag. So we use this current state node, which will check the input boolean for Jess_home. If that's on, that means Jess is at home and we don't want to continue, which is why we have this halt if state is on. Now, if it's off, that means Jess is also away, which means the flow will continue on and then reach this call service node, which will turn off that global setting, which means everyone's away. And then we have the same thing on the opposite side. For when Jess is away, we will check to see if I'm at home or not. And then continue on to this call service node to flag us all as away. So this first flow here now is just the basic setup to set those switches that say whether or not one or both of us is home or away, so that we can then build some more sophisticated automations based on those things. So let's move on to the next flow then. This next flow here is going to come into play when we start setting those input booleans to off, meaning that we're away from home. Mostly, I'm going to be driving this off of that global setting because it's more important for both of us to be away for these automations to kick in. So you can see this first event state node is tracking the input boolean for home, which is again that global setting. It's only going to continue this flow if it's off, meaning everyone is away. So if we're all away, we're going to do a few different things. So this first top branch here, this is going to a call service node. And within this call service node, it's actually running a script which is set up to turn off all of our lights inside the house. I actually did another video showing how to set up a script within Home Assistant and then trigger it within a Node-RED flow. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but I'll link that video in the description. The second thing this does is really two branches that are doing essentially the same thing based on whether our house is set to heating or cooling. So it goes to these two current state nodes to check our thermostat to see is it currently set to heating or cooling. If heating, this flow is going to continue, which will then set the house to 63. If the thermostat is currently set to cooling, this part of the flow will continue. And then it'll set the house to 78. Along with that, we actually have this bottom section, which takes that one step further to see if we're away from home for more than 20 hours, we're actually going to set the temperatures to be even more economically friendly, of during the winter setting it down to 50, and then also in the summer setting up to 90, just so we're not wasting too much energy if we're away from home. So the way that this works is we're actually going to use a different node here called a poll state node. This node again will track the current state of an entity. This is the home flag, which is that global state to say whether anyone's at home. It will halt if that's on, meaning if someone is at home, this flow won't continue. And then what this node actually does is every 60-second, based on the update interval, it will send the amount of time since the entity has been in this state, which really means how long has everyone been away from home. And we'll make use of that in this function node. So at a basic level, what this function node is doing, if it returns null, it's going to stop the flow. If it returns a message, the flow is going to continue. So let's break down each of these if statements. The first one is checking, are we less than this number of milliseconds, which really is just 20 hours. For less than 20 hours, we're going to set a flow level variable called away over 20 to 0. And this is just resetting it in case we previously had changed that to be 1. Then we'll also return null, which is going to stop the flow. If that was not true, then we're going to move on to this next section. If this flow level variable of away over 20 is already equal to 1, that means we've already done the rest of the flow. We're actually going to return null to stop it. This just prevents the scenario where we're running the same automation over and over again. Then if neither of these above two sections were true, we'll get down to the bottom section, which really means we are now over that 20-hour threshold, and it's the first time that we've crossed that threshold since we went away. And when that happens, what we'll do is set that flow level variable of away over 20 to 1. Then that'll make it so we can check it later on to not duplicate our work. Then we'll return message, which means the flow will continue. Then from there, just like above, we'll go to a heating and cooling check to know whether we should set the house to 50 or 90 based on whether we're heating or cooling. Now let's move on to the next flow, which are things that are going to happen when we come back home rather than leave home. Again, we have some of these event state nodes that are checking when Jess or myself come home. Then we're actually using this function node, which is not altering the message at all, but I'm just using this so that I can group both of our previous nodes together, so we only have one branch leaving here rather than two having to connect everywhere. So then, if either of us comes home, this flow will continue. Next, we'll check this current state node, which is actually looking at the sun's current position. This is set to halt if it is above the horizon, which really means if the sun is below the horizon, this is going to continue. And then we have this call service node, which is just turning on our family room light. This is a switch that we have set up in Home Assistant and just turns on the light in our front room where we are going to be entering in the house, and just we have some light when we get home. Then we have this bottom section down here. The trigger for this is if we're both away and either one of us comes home, we're then going to reset our temperature to what we want it to be while we're at home. So we'll again check whether we're heating or cooling. Based on that, we'll set the house to either 67 or 75. Make it more comfortable for us. Okay, and those are the basic automations that we have set up based on our presence detection. I will be continuing to add new things to here or making them a little bit more sophisticated as I think of new ideas, but for now it works pretty well. If you have thoughts about things that I could add or questions about any of the current setup, make sure to let me know in the comments below. And if you're interested in seeing more videos like this, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.